Before Plymouth Rock and the arrival of the Pilgrim settlers in 1620, the land now known as the United States, especially New England, was home to vibrant and diverse Native American societies with rich histories spanning thousands of years, the Wampanoag. The southeastern area of present-day Massachusetts was inhabited for over 12,000 years by the Wampanoag and their ancestors. They lived in dozens of villages, including Patuxet, the site where Plymouth was later established. The Wampanoag relied on hunting, fishing, and agriculture, most notably the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Other tribes of the region, neighboring and related eastern woodlands peoples included the Nauset, Narragansett, Pequot, Mohegan, Nipmuc, and Massachusetts tribes. All had their own leaders, territories, and customs, and engaged in alliances, trade, and sometimes conflict. Social structure and diplomacy. Tribal societies were governed by sachems, chiefs, and councils, and family ties and matrilineal lines were especially important. Women often held significant authority in land and social matters. Complex spiritual beliefs, seasonal festivals, and a deep connection to the land defined daily life. Early European contact, first encounters. Prior to the Pilgrims, European fishermen, explorers, and traders had visited and sometimes kidnapped native people. These visits brought new goods, but also diseases, drastically reducing native populations before Plymouth was founded. Knowledge exchange. Some native leaders had traveled to Europe. Squanto, a Patuxet Wampanoag, learned English through years in London and became a key translator and advisor for the Pilgrims. Patuxet's fate. The Patuxet village was abandoned before the Pilgrims arrived, ravaged by disease brought by earlier European contact, leaving the land open for settlement and fueling the myth of unused wilderness. Social organization and land use. Native societies in New England created sophisticated tools, built homes called wetu or wigwams, and practiced controlled burning to manage forests and improve hunting. Seasonal migration was common, with coastal villages utilized in summer and inland spots in winter. Trade networks extended across the continent. The land before Plymouth. In summary, before Plymouth Rock, the area was home to indigenous peoples with established societies, rich cultural traditions, and extensive knowledge of their environment. Their resilience and adaptations shaped early colonial success, though subsequent expansion, disease, and conflict would upend these ancient ways. Before European contact, the indigenous peoples of present-day New England, including the Wampanoag, Nauset, Massachusetts, Narragansett, Pequot, Nipmuc, Mohegan, and many others, established thriving societies with sophisticated systems of habitation, governance, and social organization. Indigenous communities lived in villages typically situated near rivers, coasts, or fertile land. Homes were built of local materials. In southern New England, these included wetu in Wampanoag lands, or wigwams made from bent saplings and bark, or reed mats. Larger groups sometimes lived in longhouses. Many societies practiced seasonal migration. They would spend summers in larger, semi-permanent villages near rivers or oceans to fish, farm, and trade, then move inland during winter for hunting and shelter. People managed their environment through controlled burns, selective harvesting, and crop rotation. Land was used communally, and resources were allocated by consensus and custom, not by private ownership in the European sense. Tribal nations were typically governed by sachems, chiefs, who were chosen for their wisdom, diplomatic skill, and service rather than hereditary rule alone. Many groups had councils of elders or clan leaders who advised the sachem and made collective decisions. Some tribes, such as the Wampanoag, organized themselves into matrilineal clans, where inheritance and social status passed through the mother's line, and women played significant roles in land decisions and governance. Intertribal diplomacy involved alliances, trade, and sometimes war. Complex systems of kinship, mutual obligation, and wampum, shall bead, exchanges, structured treaties, marriages, and economic relations. Rules and norms were maintained orally, enforced through community consensus and public discussion. Punishments were often restorative, seeking to repair harm rather than inflict retribution. Elders were highly respected as sources of law, lore, and guidance. Spiritual beliefs centered on harmony with nature and acknowledging the interconnectedness of all living things. Far from being a wilderness, pre-contact New England was a landscape of well-tended villages, extensive trade networks, and effective governance grounded in communal responsibility and adaptability. Indigenous societies thrived through flexible political structures, stewardship of resources, and a balance between independence and alliance that persisted for thousands of years before European arrival. The impact of European settlement on indigenous communities in New England was profound and devastating, touching every aspect of native life: population, culture, land, politics, and the environment. Disease and demographic collapse. Upon contact, indigenous peoples faced deadly epidemics, especially smallpox, influenza, measles, and plague that swept through communities with little resistance due to lack of prior exposure. Between 1616 and 1619, an outbreak reduced the population of some tribes by up to 90%, leaving villages depopulated and disrupting social structure and cultural transmission. Survivors struggled with malnutrition, loss of elders, and breakdowns of kinship and traditional knowledge. Land, dispossession, and demographic displacement. European colonists brought new concepts of private land ownership, fencing, and permanent settlements, in stark contrast to native communal land use and seasonal migration. As European populations grew rapidly, demand for land forced tribes into smaller territories or complete displacement. English colonists viewed native-controlled land as unused and justified taking it for expansion, often through unfair deals, legal manipulation, or outright force. Environmental changes followed. European agriculture, livestock, and large-scale deforestation altered ecosystems and undercut native hunting, farming, and gathering. Cultural and spiritual disruption. Missionary efforts, laws, and social pressures aimed to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity and force them to adopt English customs, language, and dress. As population declined and tribes merged, cultural practices and spiritual traditions were lost, altered, or hidden to survive. Political effects and resistance. Traditional tribal governance was undermined as English legal and political systems took hold. Tribes were often forced to comply with foreign laws to remain in or near their ancestral homelands. Loss of land and resources created new conflicts between indigenous groups, with colonists, and within communities, sometimes leading to wars such as the Pequot War and King Philip's War. In response to pressure and violence, some native groups allied with European powers, while others resisted or relocated. Environmental consequences. Introduction of new plants, animals, and invasive species disrupted the balance of ecosystems integral to native life. Overhunting, deforestation, draining of wetlands, and resource extraction radically changed landscapes and diminished food sources. Summary table: impact of European settlement on indigenous communities. Impact area details: disease and population loss. Up to 90% decline due to introduced diseases, loss of elders, knowledge, and social order. Land dispossession colonists claimed, fenced, and farmed land. pushing tribes into smaller territories. Environmental change, new species, livestock, and crops disrupted local ecosystems. Cultural disruption, forced conversion, loss, adaptation of traditions, breakdown of kinship systems. Political effects. English law replaced tribal governance, forced compliance to remain in the region. Displacement and resistance. Tribes merged, disappeared, or allied, resisted against colonial expansion. The long-term effects are still felt today, seen in ongoing struggles for land rights, cultural preservation, and self-determination among Native communities in New England and across the United States. The descendants of indigenous peoples in New England and the broader United States continue to experience profound and lasting cultural impacts from colonization and settlement, yet also maintain rich traditions and actively pursue cultural renewal. Efforts are ongoing to revive and maintain native languages. Tribes such as the Wampanoag have launched language reclamation projects using historical texts and oral tradition to teach younger generations. Traditional crafts, music, dances, and stories are passed down and celebrated through powwows, cultural centers, and heritage festivals. These practices not only affirm identity, but serve as education for both Native communities and the wider public. Heritage, disruption, ephemeral rights to land, forced assimilation, e.g., through Indian boarding schools or foster care, and religious conversion policies deeply disrupted knowledge transmission and kinship ties, resulting in the loss or transformation of some traditions. Discrimination and stereotyping. Centuries of colonial narratives, legal exclusion, and stereotypes have led to erasure or marginalization, sometimes perpetuating misunderstandings or denying tribal presence and identity in New England today. Land rights and environmental stewardship, ongoing struggles for land recognition, water rights, and resource management keep alive ancient relationships to ancestral homelands and reinforce traditional ecological knowledge. Civic and social recognition. Tribes strive for federal and state recognition, vital for sovereignty, access to education, and health resources, key to future cultural vitality.
Recent decades have seen a renewed push for Native heritage trails, museum exhibits, and public memorials, helping challenge colonial narratives. Advocacy for more accurate teaching of Indigenous history counters myths of disappearance and deepens public understanding.
Indigenous descendants in New England face enduring effects of historical trauma and land loss, but communities are rebuilding, reviving language, and advocating for recognition, ensuring culture endures and adapts.
Indigenous healing practices are actively used and adapted in contemporary communities. Sweat lodges, smudging, and seasonal ceremonies promote cleansing, connection to ancestors, and renewal of tribal identity.
Healing also involves storytelling, drumming, chanting, and music, which foster resilience, community cohesion, and cultural education.
We gather willow bark and wild ginger to make teas and salves that heal. Many Native communities retain plant knowledge: willow bark for pain relief, wild ginger for fever.
At our clinic, we offer traditional herbal options alongside prescribed medications, respecting patient preferences and cultural practices.
Elders guide ceremonies and teach protocols so healing is understood as community-wide, restoring cultural continuity and resilience.
We're teaching language and healing practices through workshops and demonstrations to pass traditions to younger generations.
We combine ceremonies, story circles, and community supports with clinical care to address trauma and strengthen families.
Our center creates a culturally safe space where people can access traditional healing alongside mainstream health services.
Today, Indigenous healing practices, ceremony, plant medicine, storytelling, and community support remain vibrant and continue to enhance well-being.